Bye. Welcome to Speak Sex. I am your host, Eurydice. Speak Sex is a liberation conversation about gender in patriarchy, intersectional, practical, socio-sexual justice, and we believe that the choice is always between love and fear. So with that in mind, we have our guest, Michelle, today. She's an undergraduate in a Southern university that shall remain unnamed. And we're going to talk about fraternity culture in this moment, in 2021. Fraternities and sororities have kind of, I feel, been ignored in the overall mainstream conversation about academia as a source of liberalism and woke culture, which when you look at the socialization of the students in many of these schools, it's not. So that's one of the reasons that I want to bring this up, because I think it's a huge issue. So welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Oh, it's my pleasure. This is just such a fascinating, cultural phenomenon that survives. So yeah, tell me a little bit about your exposure or how you got to think about fraternities and investigate them.
Yes. So on my campus, I work as a writer at our on-campus newspaper staff. And I was focused on writing a column that was more gossip-based and more just kind of student chatter rather than a lot of hardcore reporting. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, a lot of the chatter around the school has led me to do some hardcore reporting as a result of that. And one of the chatters around the school was, during our COVID-19 pandemic, the school was extremely strict about wearing your mask, about social distancing. And it would be so severe as to, if there was a photo of you out with friends and it was reported to the school, if you were just out to dinner, you would have to go on trial and you were up for suspension or for some kind of disciplinary action, depending on how severe the COVID guidelines were and how you broke them. Mm-hmm. So there was chatter around the school that the fraternities, which have houses on campus, were throwing all these parties. And it wasn't a very secretive conversation. I mean, people were talking about it in passing at the library, in class. And I actually reached out to a few of the girls who I knew, because I saw them posting these parties on their Snapchat or on their Instagram. And I asked them if they would feel comfortable if I interviewed them anonymously about their experiences at these parties.
So there was kind of like not only double standard, but an unspoken, tacit understanding that this is a subculture that thrives outside mainstream culture, that no one is supervising, right?
No. Mm-hmm. And so I, along with some other reporters, reported on this, and we reported on the dates. We had all the information about these parties going on. We had dates, we had location, we had details about what was going on inside of the parties, that there were tarps on the windows. We had detailed reports of police being called to these parties to report them, and that there were witnesses saying that police would go to the door, they'd have a conversation, and police would leave. There'd be no shutdown of the parties. So we wrote an article about it. Mm-hmm. The article came out. It was very popular, got a lot of attention. And when administration was reached out to about what was happening, they refused to comment. They refused to interview. They would just put out a statement saying, if you see anyone engaging in behaviors that violate our COVID-19 guidelines, please direct them to this report link. And people were reporting, but nothing was happening. Mm-hmm. And it just was extremely disheartening. It was the first time I saw these groups just be blatantly ignored And you would see a vast difference between the fraternities who had a lot of money, who had a lot of very wealthy alumni. They had the biggest houses on campus versus, you have these little, the smaller fraternities or the mid-tier fraternities who don't have these big, nice houses. They don't have a lot of alumni because eventually people are pushing and pushing and pushing, saying, hey, you have to do something about the fraternities. We have so many kids on campus who are infected with COVID-19. We're scared that the school is going to be shut down. And eventually they said, okay, they had enough information because there was video evidence, there was photo evidence, there was just so much chatter on school, especially after these articles came out and nothing was happening. Eventually the school said, okay, we're going to suspend these three or four top tier fraternities, but this mid-tier fraternity is going to be kicked off campus. And what was crazy is that they did the same things. And you have to wonder, why does this mid-tier fraternity who does not have a lot of alumni, why do they get kicked off versus these top-tier fraternities with all these big, wealthy alumni? Why do they just get a slap on the wrist and a week-long suspension or whatever it was? And it comes down to money. And I'm sure it's different between private and public universities. There could be a difference, but I know for sure that in private universities, they value alumni very much. And I personally believe through my own research that the more money you bring in and the more alumni you have, the more untouchable you are.
Yeah. And it's, again, it's like hereditary. So we know that, the sons or daughters of sisters or brothers, fraternity brothers or sorority sisters, right, come to join, they are legacies and they join they rush for the same fraternity or sorority. So it's something that's going on it's a generational kind of like pyramid of obedience, right? And, there is kind of like a grooming that I think goes on, which is like a socialization. It's a rite of passage. So it's really deeply, it's ingrained and it's hard to, even define and much harder to stop because like parents send their kids to a school where they pay a lot of money and then donate even more money for this to be part of their experience, And it's interesting how, like, with the passage of time, I guess, parents put a spin, like a positive or heroic spin on these, like, rituals, that to us from the outside, from what I hear about them, sound completely, like, dehumanizing and, debasing. So, like, if this had happened to me, I would definitely not wish it on my kid, is what I'm saying. But yeah, you're right. Like, frat houses are like mansions on campus or around, even if they're not on campus, they're right next to it, and they have like a mythology to them. They have like the Persian rugs and the hunting trophies and the old like state libraries and like all the tropes of like, club masculinity, right? Like private club, right? And like guests are announced, at the front door and, members come to dinners in tuxedos. And so like there is that whole, mythology, like it's staged. It's very much staged to impress. And yes, money is behind it. All of that couldn't happen if it weren't funded, like generously. So that's where, one has to eventually go, like, find the money source.
And one way how I know that, how protected these groups are was actually just witnessing how these groups reacted to the backlash and reacted to the chatter around school and articles coming out. The first, it's funny to me because I think women get a lot of heat about, women being bitchy and mean girls, and they gossip and they get together and they plan out these things. And I hate that women get that because I think men can be just as bitchy and just as gossipy and just as ruthless. And I really witnessed it firsthand after these articles came out, because I remember the first thing that these boys did was they looked at the entire newspaper staff and they just hunted down, researched anything that they could find. And I remember our editor-in-chief, who was a really good, goody two-shoes kind of girl, she went on a boat with, I believe, just a few of her roommates and friends. It was a small group of people she lived with. And somehow these boys got a hold of a photo of her on this boat, and they reported her, and she had to go through all of these unnecessary trials. This is a girl who never had anything on her record at all. And all of a sudden she's up for suspension because she violated the COVID guideline of being in a group of 5 or more without a mask, let alone, these are her roommates and people she lives with. And then another thing I saw was, which was quite shocking for me, is I would receive calls from our school's suicide hotline saying that someone reported that I was trying to kill myself. And just these little things, it wasn't aggressive in your face. It was more just this taunting,
Yeah, it's mind games. It's like it messes with your mental health is what it is.
Messages on social media, creating fake accounts. It was scary. Like, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I'm a human being. It made me worried. And I think they thought that I would, shut up, or that I'd stop writing, or people would stop talking about it. But it did the exact opposite for me, because, I try to live by what I stand for, and I try not to back down to anyone. But what it really just showed me was that nobody has ever tried to shut this down before, because it's just that kind of reaction, that very like little boy, middle school, high school meanness, that just the intimidation, cool little pranks or whatever they were pulling, that's what little boys do. It's what little kids do. That's not how a real adult would react to backlash.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I think that what they function, with like a lot of this type of head games, so like they say you can walk out anytime you want, right? But it's a hostage situation, where you in a cult, it's like a misogynist cult, and they value loyalty above anything. So when you've gone through like the difficulty of hazing and the debasement, right, of your self-respect for the acceptance by the group, then you're already controlled and brainwashed. You're constantly gaslighted, alienated because you kept within the fraternity only. You're brick-walled. So what happens is that the members who join, they kind of, I think, never get out of that, as you say, like, schoolyard bully mentality, right? Or like tiny mafia mentality, or whatever it is. They just, their entire social life is Greek life. That's how they meet people. That's how they rotate like social group loops. That's how they understand themselves in the world. That's how they identify. And I think that they stay that way often, even after they graduate, right? So it's like a way where sweet boys are being turned into like toxic boys. They go into school as freshmen, and then they are forced to become abusive, in order to like be accepted, socially accepted. I mean, and they sell that, they're told this is like brotherhood, but to me, it's very ironic, because it's like, they're robbing their fellow like male friends, from their own basic human rights, right? From their dignity. they force each other to like be followers, to kind of like see adulthood as like a brutal competition or something. But then they tell each other, be a man, like they compare, they call this being your own man or being a free man, like secrecy is be a man, like don't tell your parents, be a man, grow up. It's like a mob mentality, or like, again, like what I said, like La Familia, the tribal group thing. Yeah. And I feel that a lot of these guys, give up their morals, and then they enter, the work part of their lives. They go into their careers. They become finance guys. They enter corporate life. And the same kind of like motto persists, where they must prove their loyalty, every day by getting debased. It's like, they're groomed to allow like corporate hierarchy to do the same thing to them, to devalue, like to force them to devalue like their love partners, to choose money or power, insider power over like, whatever it is, women, respect, ethics, like all the stuff that we think makes someone like a decent human, Absolutely.
And I think you bring up a really good point, because I think anytime people criticize fraternities, especially if you're a woman criticizing fraternity culture, you're immediately, the angry blue-haired feminist who hates men and thinks they should all die. You can't, I think women, get labeled as these crazy, hysterical people whenever they try to criticize these groups. And I actually think that a lot of these boys who join fraternities by themselves alone are vulnerable young men. Right. And they deserve love and they deserve respect in any kind of group they join. And I don't think they want to hurt anyone. Mm-hmm. But when it's kind of like Lord of the Flies. Mm-hmm. It becomes dangerous when there's this group think and then there are absolutely no consequences. Mm-hmm. So what I always thought to myself is like, what is the message here that we're giving about fraternities? So it's like, if you are ultra masculine and you're emotionless and you're willing to suffer, you get to be a part of this club where you can get away with racism, misogyny, sexism, and pretty much anything. You can get away with anything. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because this whole attitude of like, if you're willing to, put aside all of your morals, you get to be this untouchable. That's nothing new in our society. Like you were saying, in like the corporate world and politics, and as we get older, men often do this outside of fraternity culture as well. And I think it's just a way to start them young, and it's just a really vicious cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it is particularly vulnerable guys who want to prove that they're strong. It's almost like it's your first time away from home. It's a little like, someone going to prison for the first time, like, you feel like kind of nervous and you don't know much about how to interact. You're surrounded by strangers. You don't have the security or comfort for home. So you're extremely vulnerable, and that's when they prey on you with like, will be the new home, the new family, the new security, it's actually similar to like the army model, where people also are going right after home, like from high school, right? They get recruited. So like the army, it's like this enforcement of like extreme hierarchy, where you, release choice and individuality, it's probably like, like the way that all the, like the Freemasons or the KKK or like the Proud Boys now, or all these type of groups, are all organized in a similar way, where you have to sacrifice or renounce, let's say your yourself, your soul, your individual choice, right, in exchange for belonging. And it's like, you know, a Faustian bargain. But when you're 18 and you're just out of home, and your friends are like your first two friends, you know, or like your roommate, who's your first friend, is also doing it and is like kind of like competing with you. And this is your first exposure to like, post high school culture. And you see that like everybody around will respect you if you get accepted, right, into a fraternity. And then, everybody talks like really highly of Greek life. Like you don't have time to think, and then you want the camaraderie, you want like the team fidelity, like the fraternal bonds, and and then there is like the whole like man speak, right? So like you want to learn those terms because you want to have respect and you want to fit in. So I think like it's behavior modification, in my opinion, at a very very vulnerable young age, for young people, like, and for young men in particular, it prepares them to cross over from like being a son or, to being a patriarch in patriarchy,
Absolutely. And I almost feel uncomfortable referring to 18-year-olds as young men, because although they're legally adults, I think being 18 in the 2020s is so different than being 18 in the 1980s or the 1950s or the 1920s. The being 18, the role of what is expected of a young man or a young woman at 18 is so different. And I truly think that the age from 18 to 22 in my generation is you are still a child. Most people who are in that age range are still being either living with their family or they're being supported by their family. It's just not the same.
Yeah, you're right. No, you're absolutely right. I see that, and that's partly because, we have a better standard of living, right? So
yes.
like, a couple of generations ago, like life was harder and harsher. So, unfortunately, people were exposed to like more abuse, more corporeal punishment at home, more of a sense of like fight or flight in life in general, like scarcity, you saw your parents like suffer, right? All kinds of difficulties that, your generation has been spared. But yeah, as a result, I agree, at 18, you're still a child, you're still a teen, and you're still a child. And, the human brain doesn't get fully formed until like the age of 26. So, people are still growing. They're growing physically, they are, underage in that sense, they are still being formed. And the idea that like parents who otherwise are so, protective and cuddling, like parents in the 21st century, right? Send their kids out to these like secretive, environments that are like gangs that require like initiation rites and, darings and objectification of themselves and of others, loyalty like over morality, and obedience, like blind obedience. Like it's just insane that, but I think that that's something that is happening individually for a lot of parents, but it's not really, a big topic in the mainstream conversation, but I do think that parents are worried about it, and they find that their kids shut down. They go to school, and if they decide to rush, they just do not talk about it. So there is like a wall of silence, right? And especially I think moms like, feel like they're losing their kids, to this kind of like, social behavior, I guess, So, yeah, I think that, do you know anything about the hazing rituals? Because I have heard from a number of parents, examples of what goes on, and it's just beyond shocking. Yeah,
well,
what did you hear?
The first thing that I think is notable is you can log on to any university website across the nation and look at their fraternity policies, and they will say in big letters, we have no hazing policy. There will be absolutely no tolerating of any kind of hazing. And I think that is the biggest lie that universities tell parents. I mean, the students know that that's a lie, but the parents might read that and they'll feel a breath of relief. They'll say, oh, there's no tolerance. They're probably on top of it. But the facts are is that hazing happens, and it's easy for hazing to happen in these very secretive kind of societies where they're untouchable, because even if it does get out that there's a report of hazing, the school's not going to. They're just going to sweep it under the rug. They'll do a slap on the wrist because it will look worse for the university than it will for the fraternity. And they don't want to lose any money, and they don't want to definitely lose any students from it, with admissions. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But through my own personal experience and what I've witnessed and heard, my university had much more tolerable hazing than I've heard from other schools. They'll have them do very stupid things like, running laps when it's raining out, or, more harmless things. However, I think it's important to note that there is very much a distinction when I talk about fraternities between the white fraternities and the black fraternities. Mm-hmm. And I know that they report to different organizations as well. I'm not sure what the names of those are. Mm-hmm. But the historically black fraternities, they have much more, they're more secretive, because when you look at white fraternities, they have, a very large community size, more money, more alumni, big frat houses. They have a higher level of invisibility and unaccountability. But these black fraternities, they have more eyes on them. And in turn, they have to be more secretive. Mm-hmm. And the problem is when you have to be more secretive, because, when you, especially when you're on a predominantly white campus, if, a young white girl sees a group of 5 or more black men, she's clutching her purse, she's, getting nervous, because there's a lot of racism that still exists on our college campuses, and, it's unavoidable. So these men have to put on more of a front of, this, we're doing the right thing, this is all safe. However, every fraternity has, a darker side. And when these black fraternities are pushed into more secretive rituals, mm-hmm. I think they become almost worse, because really nobody knows exactly what's going on. And the only reason I say that is because I remember being on our campus gym and seeing a young black man wearing, Greek lettering tank top, and he had a Greek symbol branded on his chest. And, that's something you never see, you hear about it, but I would never expect to see, such a young man with like this huge scar. Mm-hmm. It was all puffy, and, it looked gnarly, it looked horrible, and what's funny is that all of, nobody really talks about the black fraternities on campus, and it's because they are so secretive. They really fly under the radar, and I don't necessarily know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because if there is something that's going on that's wrong, we're not going to know about it, and there's mm-hmm. also way less likely that one of those young men are going to say, hey, I need some help,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, fraternities to me are like rich people gangs. It's the same. It's the same functionality, but society demonizes one and allows the other. But there is no significant difference between fraternities and street gangs. It's like they can both be categorized as gangs, I think, under the law, except that we're kind of like overlooking that fact, basically. And I think that's that's kind of like a connection also where if we could accept or understand that as a matter of fact, as the greater society, that this is what it is, then I think we could begin to kind of have a more critical take on that life, But yeah, as we've been saying, like if, dads give millions to their fraternity, and if the boys believe already, that in order to succeed in life, they have to belong to like a financial elite frat or something, and if like word of mouth is that they help each other get jobs, when they graduate, and where they can have like positions of power, or they promote their own, so like that's very typical of the of the Greek societies, and I think that like guilds, medieval guilds, which were closed, no one else could enter, right? So even we're like, oh, women can do every job, or what? Well, there are a lot of like unseen exceptions to that, where the culture closes ranks, right? And it starts in college. That's where like the patriarchy is inculcating, and propagating this kind of like segregational loyalty, to the male tribe above, let's say, loyalty to girlfriends or families or whatever. And you boys like become men by being hazed, which is like ancient, like adulthood rituals of like scarification, which you just mentioned, so it's not, it's represented as like, Southern gentleman life, and normalized, but in fact, it adheres to like really antiquated gender relations, and expressions, it has its own language. So it's almost like an alien nation, right? It's an alien like subculture that swoops in and like transforms the boys. And then, when the boys go through it, they will turn and abuse the freshmen, the next year. And then when they're finally seniors, like they'll be treated like kings, but they still have to put loyalty before everything, Yeah, but this kind of like cult of seniority is also so creepy, in my opinion. But I think that, the fraternity culture is like blazing its way through all of our elite institutions, our private schools. Something like 50% of young men in America are in fraternities. That's the official statistic. So wow. Imagine, yeah.
And I think it's important to talk about what role these fraternity houses play in relation to the women on campus. Because before you reach the age of 21 and you're living on a college campus and you can't go to the bar because maybe, you don't have a fake ID, or, you don't have any bars, around your area, you're going to the frat house, mm-hmm. And especially when you're a freshman girl and you're newly 18, the only place that I can get a drink at for sure is the frat house, and I find it really interesting how, girls, they go to the frat house every weekend because that's their safe bet on getting drunk and listening to loud music. And then as soon as they turn 21, they don't want to go to the frat house anymore because they look around and they see it's all young 18-year-old girls. And now they can actually go to a bar and get themselves a drink. Mm-hmm. And I found it's kind of like that quote from the movie Dazed and Confused, where the guy says, the reason why I love high school girls is because I keep getting older and they stay the same age.
Aye.
You know, that's what frat parties are. You know, I thought about how, you know, these 21-year-old girls are so uncomfortable partying around underage girls. However, most of these boys in the fraternity houses who actually hold the power, who are, you know, the seniors in college, who are, you know, the president of the fraternity, they're the ones throwing these parties for these 18-year-old girls, you know, and it doesn't bother them as they get older that, you know, everyone that turns up to the frat party is still at that ripe age of, you know, 18, 19. And, you know, it isn't that big of an age difference. I'll give you that. But I think there is something to be said about how girls age out of going to frat parties, but the boys love it. You know?
Yeah, because it's rape culture. So basically the fraternities like feed, you know, that mentality of rape, which is, you know, the younger girls are the best choice, right? Or the hottest, or again, which is like the most vulnerable. Yeah, I mean, which brings to mind like Brett Kavanaugh, you know, that story. Because, you know, in order to join, like, I think it was Delta Kappa Epsilon at Yale, he had to go through like all these ritual humiliations, you know, like hop around campus in a leather football helmet while grabbing his crotch and chanting, I'm a geek, I'm a geek, I'm a fool, like stuff like that, you know. And the Delta, I think that they call themselves the Deeks, you know, were very, like they had a reputation for like exactly this, the debauchery, the young girls, you know, they waved flags made of like the girls' underwear, and they read aloud from Penthouse, you know, during meetings in the quad, and they threw like, you know, all these alcoholic parties. So what happened to Brett Kavanaugh was like a sexual assault on a dare, you know, and look at the price he had to pay. I mean, in his testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, like he was asked things like, you know, his familiarity with the word boof, which he said was a reference to farting, but like they were, you know, everyone apparently knew. I mean, we only read that at the time, that it was like a slang for anal sex. And then another term was like devil's triangle that was made famous during those hearings, which refers to like sex between two men and one girl. And he said in his testimony, it was like a drinking game, like quarters, whatever that is. But the point is that would he have even, you know, raped or coerced the girls who blamed him of doing that, you know, with the use of drugs and alcohol to sedate them into, you know, sexual submission, if he hadn't been in a frat and encouraged by the frat and on a dare, you know, that's like, that's a question. And now he's the father, you know, of children. And also this kind of like stain, you know, will stay in his, let's say, you know, biography and history forever. So like we can see him as a victim in that sense, because he was, you know, as young as, you know, all these other boys who kind of join without understanding, you know, what they're doing. You know, they don't, like, they don't know what hazing involves. You're not told what the hazing is going to be in advance, you know. Like, I think in the beginning, they tell you it lasts a week, and then the deadline gets extended to like 4 weeks or longer, or as long as they want, until like you've proved your loyalty daily, you know. And, you know, they audition their littles and they audition their bigs, you know, and it's kind of like, and I mean, this is the stuff I've heard. I've heard that like boys have to put, you know, a bottle of alcohol on their heads and get on a plank position on bottle caps. So they like bleed on the caps, you know, sometimes blindfolded. They have to cover their heads with like used shirts dipped in like vomit, or, you know, like if they throw up, they have to eat their vomit. I mean, it's like, you know, they do alcohol and coke nonstop. And it's like sleep deprivation, food deprivation, sex deprivation. It's like, I mean, they don't get waterboarded, but it's like the torture of enemies, is a type of, rituals that they have to go through,
That's what I've heard the most of, is kind of like these disgusting, just dehumanizing acts, not necessarily the sex aspect, although I do have something to say on that. But before I get there, I have heard stories of, these boys being forced to rip a bong, swallow the bong water, throw it back up into the bong, and then rip the bong again. And just, gross. Or the sleep deprivation. Yeah. I've heard eating soft cheeses out of a toilet bowl. Just it's just gross. It makes you go ew. It's just gross things like that. But when we talk about sexual assault, I haven't heard much of that in hazing, but I do remember when I was doing my writing and I was asking these girls about certain houses and their impression of these houses and what their reputation was. And I remember this one house, people would always go, "Oh, that's the rape house. That's where all girls get sexually assaulted at that house." Or, "Oh, they some girls always getting raped at that house." And it blew me away. I was like, wow, it was just so casual in how everyone knew this one house for that. And when I asked if these girls have reported anything, and they'd say, "Yeah, but nothing ever happens."
Wow.
And it was just really disheartening, and it was really shocking. And I remember, speaking to this one guy who I know who's part of a fraternity, and he's not a part of that house specifically, but I remember talking to him, and he was telling me, yeah, whenever we hear that a guy has assaulted a girl or, raped a girl, we immediately kick them out. I was like, oh, that's a good thing. And he said, but to be honest with you, we do it just because, he's like, we do it mostly because it looks good for the frat. But, the fact that he's getting punished is like, also a good thing. And it blew my mind that the punishment was an afterthought. The main goal of kicking that guy out of the frat was, oh, I don't want our frat to get suspended, or I don't want it to look bad.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's always about like what's good for the frat. It's good for me. And that's it, Yeah. I mean, I've heard a lot of stories about, we all know that, through word of mouth, but also maybe the news a little bit. I mean, but specifically through word of mouth, I have heard of fraternities. And again, we don't want to name any, but, that open their doors only to girls who they think are like sugar babies, or who they find through social media and stuff as open to like the sugar baby culture, so they can, pay them or promise to pay them. And then they bring them upstairs to their inner sanctums, get them drunk, get them raped. And it's always like through the back door, there is like a special door. Some, the ones that have this practice have a special door, and they have like frat brothers who are bouncers, who will say like, if a girl's ugly, they'll tell her like, sorry, there is no party here. They have to like rate the girls. They have to take a girl out who is like a 7.5 or above rate. Like they are not allowed to date girls who are not highly rated, So like in that environment, like how can a girl feel safe, with her boyfriend? Like, let's say that's your boyfriend, you're constantly competing with his, loyalty and alliance to the fraternity, like maybe he's a sweet boy, but he's going to boss you around in front of his fraternity brothers, or maybe he wants to be with you, but he has to drop you, because he has to go do stuff for an initiation, and then I think they have like sister sororities, and so they'll encourage their girlfriends to join like a sister sorority, which is also kind of like, like being a sister wife. I mean, it's just so, I don't know. It's so extreme and so backward, in our opinion. I think girls, have to constantly be aware of like how not to get their drinks spiked, it's a very unsafe world.
It's incredibly damaging
to be a girl.
It's incredibly damaging, especially to those, young men, expectations about how much sex you're supposed to be having, how you're supposed to be having sex, how intimate you're supposed to be with the partner you're having sex. I think it's incredibly, incredibly damaging to young men who, they're 18 years old, they're out of their house, they're not living with mom anymore, they're probably having more sex than they did in high school, if any,
much more,
So, it's
and many more
just,
drugs, and
absolutely, it's really horrible when I've heard stories of boys being told that they have to go and find, and I know this is very popular amongst the deep South universities, where the boys are challenged to go find an overweight girl to have sex with. And when they bring her back home and they start having sex with the overweight girl, they'll have boys hiding in the room who come out of the closet or wherever they're hiding, and they'll start making pig noises.
Oh,
and God. It's not only humiliating for this young girl, but it's supposed to be even, humiliating for the freshman boy who's a pledge. You're disgusting. You're disgusting for having, sex with a woman who is overweight. And it's definitely horrible.
Yeah. What do you know? I mean, do you know about girls who pledge?
I do, and I know that the sororities, there was a huge crackdown recently on the campus I attend, where there were videos leaked of girls doing a challenge called Blow or Blow. And what that pretty much is you either have to give, you're given an option. You have to give a blowjob to this guy in front of all your sisters, or you have to do a certain amount of cocaine. And, usually these girls are tiny girls, they're these little skinny girls, because a lot of these sororities, they're, they care about image a lot, and a lot of, being a petite little girl is ideal in a lot of these sororities. So, a lot of those girls, when they have a lot of alcohol in their system, now you're introducing a lot of cocaine. It's not really a great mix. And there was a video, I think, that leaked, and it got out in the public, and it was being widely reported. And the school was forced to really crack down on sororities. So now I have not heard about any stories on my campus about sorority hazing. I think they have maybe small things they're supposed to do, but nothing super damaging like I've heard from the boys who, are still getting away with a lot.
Yeah. And also, I think like part of it, even if the hazing is not so abusive, I think the prioritization is, paramount. It's fundamental. And I think that's a huge, brain chemistry changer, I mean, again, you have been raised at home, you're trying to do what your parents say or get away with not doing what they say, but not get caught. But in either way, it's kind of like very basic, way of psychology. It's not healthy by any means. The nuclear family is not healthy at all, but you survive it a little better. But then you enter this world and your time is not your own. And I think you are definitely trained to go into work life where your time is not your own. You can't choose for yourself. You just have to do what money tells you to do, or what, status tells you to do, So like what I know about, kids who have pledged, but even, young, like, boys who have been accepted, it's just like, if they are with their girlfriends or they are with their friends, they'll get a text and they'll be like, I gotta go. I gotta go do some lines of coke with the boys, or, I gotta go do a lineup, or I gotta go like, rollerblade to every single class for the rest of the semester, or whatever it is, so those things are not necessarily, gross or, humiliating. I mean, the drugs are, but that's just that's these boys, I guess, bad choice. But what, or I gotta go to like a dinner party or a frat dinner, or so. What I'm saying is that this becomes like second nature, where you begin to think of yourself as having to put the interests of whatever, group think over your own. Like, what do you want? Well, I want to be with my girlfriend. I want to cuddle up, or what do you want? I want to go for like a walk in the woods and clear my mind, whatever it is. What do you want? I want to go like hear some live music. I want to anything. You have to put that aside. Like, to me, that's just so, I think that's perhaps the most negative effect.
They steal your youth.
This becomes normalized, and you no longer know what you want for yourself.
They steal your youth, and they steal your freedom of choice.
Right.
And, even, I was thinking, even if they have to do, things that you wouldn't necessarily call abusive and just more embarrassing, and I think about
or
just
nothing
the
at
mental,
all, but yeah, exactly.
The mental toll of rushing, the mental toll of pledging, and you go to all these different houses, whether they're sorority or fraternity, and you say to yourself, "Man, I really like those guys," and they're one of the best fraternities on campus, and then they drop you, first round, and then you start to think to yourself, "What's wrong with me? Is it the way I look? Am I weird? Am I awkward?" And, both girls and boys go through that, when they're rushing, and it's pretty tough. I remember watching girls, who I was close with as they go through the process of rush, and, they get to the end of rush and their only bid is from like, the low tier sorority on campus, who are, totally fine, nice girls, but they're labeled, the weird girls. And, they just went through this whole process, spending thousands of dollars on makeup and sweating in the heat, or, going, putting on heels, walking around everywhere every day. And then they just think to themselves, oh, I could never join the sorority. I'm just going to drop because I don't want to be the weird girl. And it's the same thing for men. It's just expressed differently. And that itself is definitely some sort of like mental torture. Yeah.
And I think it's, it's a split. It's like you have to choose between, truth and culture. You have to choose between nature and culture, like between who you are truly, naturally, authentically, and who you're told you're supposed to be, and I really, I think it's the details don't matter, but what matters is the brainwashing that kind of like divides you from you. So you objectify yourself, like what you're describing with the girls, but it's the same for the boys, it's like they separate themselves from their bodies and they force their minds, which is the part of them that's been brainwashed, right? Controlled. Their minds are treating their bodies, their own bodies, as objects, They're willing to pimp out their own bodies as objects. They're willing to, force their bodies to go through pain or disgust or all kinds of like other painful experiences and be okay with it mentally, So it kind of like separates us from our bodies who are really our natural truth. Like you gotta be able to get back into your body and check in with your body to know how you really feel about something in life, like for the rest of your life. I'm sorry, when we live in a society where we don't know what's real, what's not real, right? Truth, misinformation, illusion, social media, right? So many like veils and screens. How do you know what works for you and what makes you happy and healthy, right? You check in with yourself as a whole. And so they take that ability away from us. They are, I think that's the most hurtful part of all, that, they make it normal to kind of not, be one with your body, like be a whole person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that really comes down to what, kind of goes back to what we talked about in the first place, because at its heart, I don't think that there's anything wrong with, a social group or any kind of social club. We have to recognize that fraternities do a lot of great work for charities, and, they have some kind of academic expectation of certain fraternities where, if you're not of a certain GPA, you can't join. And, some of those things, I guess, are healthy and positive, promotions where, wow, if I want to be a part of this fraternity, I have to do so many hours of community service a week, or I have to do, I have to maintain a good GPA. And those are positive things, that you would definitely want to promote and I think are healthy. Mm-hmm. However, it all comes down to administration and regulation and just honest conversations, because these are young boys. They need supervision and they need guidance. I really don't blame the boys on their own, because on their own, they are vulnerable, and it's up to the adults, the true adults, who are the administrators and the people funding mm-hmm. these groups mm-hmm. to make sure that they are safe and make sure that they are healthy. Mm-hmm. And it just needs to be honest conversations between them.
Yeah, and transparency, which
the more you sweep it under the rug, mm-hmm. Someone's going to trip. Mm-hmm. And that's what needs to be. That is really what needs to be fixed, because if we don't fix that, we're going to be stuck in this vicious cycle.
Yeah, I agree. Like they should. I know that it is said that in those back rooms where the girls are invited, there are cameras, and then that's used as blackmail. But what the school should do is actually record everything. Record everything that happens in a house that's on campus, and not allow any of the fraternities to function as such outside, off campus. I think like during COVID, we learned that. Like, imagine if fraternities, were online only. Like, how different that is. Like, how much of this brainwashing can you do when you're both like sitting in a chair in your living room? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but like finding a way to enforce continuous accountability, which would be, for example, if everything were recorded and the school and only the school had access to these recordings, right? So there is a way for them to go back and see what actually happened, and then, pass out some sort of discipline, have written bylaws of discipline for infractions, that the school can actually mete out. Yes, accountability, is important. I think throughout academia, for professors, or also especially tenured professors who've enjoyed the freedom of abuse over their students, for so long. So, and to me, that's like finding a way to do that ethically, and respectfully, is what matters. Like not building new fancy buildings and, not whatever, spending money to advertise and whatever else, universities are doing. But first and foremost, kind of like creating a system, a standard, a systemic standard of accountability and repercussions, then ideally, like, which would be the same in all schools. That would make sense to me.
It would be beneficial to all, and I really think back to, the COVID-19 pandemic and the way the fraternities were treated on my campus. Now, if administration, who had evidence and had photos and had reports and police reports and everything, everyone knew, right? If they had just went to the fraternity, said, hey, you guys can't be doing this, this semester we're trying to be very strict. We're going to suspend fraternities for the semester. Hopefully next semester, this will be a different situation and we'll have the pandemic in the rear view. Now, if they had just done that instead of ignored, there wouldn't have been the uprising from the student body. There wouldn't have been articles. There wouldn't have been other media attention. And I just think to myself, it all comes back again. The only reason they didn't do that was because they didn't want to stop the money coming into the school.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they're all like career administrators. And I mean, it's, like job safety. And again, like a very similar hierarchy, like the one we've been criticizing in Greek culture, goes on in academic culture, And the board of trustees, invisible, have like ultimate decision making. So, yeah, it's kind of like a similar bureaucracy where, reason, reason is really kind of like ignored.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's ironic in the academic setting, but it happens there most.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's why, I mean, that's why I began discussing like the irony between, the idea we have these days, at least, of academic culture being like uber liberal and woke, which is totally performative, like, okay, we have like some new words that maybe are off-putting to people who didn't grow up with them, right? And we have like some modicum of like racialization, which upsets conservatives, I guess, or whatnot. But really, the system is the same. The names can change, the people can change, but unless we change the system, right, there's no real change. It just goes on. Like the stuff that we've been discussing and describing comes to us straight from the Dark Ages.
Absolutely. And, we really just touched the surface of so much that goes on in fraternities. I mean, we haven't even gotten into why is there a difference between white and black fraternities. The black fraternities are historically black, but the white fraternities are supposed to be of all people, right? Mm-hmm. But you don't see a lot of racial mixing in the traditionally, as we have white fraternities. You don't see that. And I have seen other races. I've seen white men and Latin men join black fraternities. It's a minority of them, but they do. But any boy who joins a white fraternity, if they are of a different race, are called whitewashed, and a lot of their peers from their racial group would, regard them as kind of, just, just acting like a white boy. And I think that's very interesting. We haven't even talked about the homophobia that comes out of fraternities, and how, there's kind of homoerotic tendencies in fraternities themselves, which is ironic. The rape culture, misogyny, we just touched the surface on that. There's just a lot to be discussed about fraternities, and, it's important to be talked about for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad we did what we could. And we can also, do another episode if we decide in the future. So thank you, Michelle. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for, your contribution and your honesty and your time. And everyone out there, thank you for listening, and hit subscribe. And until next week, keep speaking sex. If I could make love incessantly, I would be God.